Hi, Matthew. It's great that we could connect and get together and have a little talk about what you do and your journey. So with that being said, why don't you just please share with our listeners exactly what you do, in your time?
Thank you, John.
Sure.
Yes, I've been on a journey to figure that out. As we may have spoken about, I've been through a big transition in life. Maybe we'll get to that. But right at this point, I'm finishing a master's degree in the psychology of leadership, and I'm launching a coaching and an education service. There are the two types of services. One is individual coaching geared towards people in leadership roles, whether it be small business, middle-sized business, and then if people in bigger business, obviously, if they reach out to me for those services as well. And and then there's the educational piece, which is workshops, conferences, speeches, things like this. Maybe to large groups or just teams. Now, all of this has to do with how we lead ourselves, how we lead those around us, and then how we lead inside organizations. As we know, organizations, there's all kinds of complex dynamics that can also happen there. And really one of the lines that I really live by and my services go by is lead better, love better, and live better. And so all of those things are for me are important in the work that I do. So how do I do that? I meet people, especially in leadership roles. I meet them at that intersection, which can sometimes be a chaotic intersection or a complex intersection of where their personal and professional life meet. To work with them to really care for their priorities and their inner circles. And their first inner circle is themselves. So the relationship with themselves, again, self-leadership. And then what are my priorities? What's most important to me? What are my inner circles, whether it be personal or professional, and how am I showing up? And then leadership, and then in a bigger context. For me, that's important because a lot of people in leadership roles, again, life is intense, and there's a lot of demands on people in leadership roles in any sector. And oftentimes their priorities pay a very high price at what I call the altar of success or the altar of work. In the big picture of life, when people bring this up, they're like, well, I don't want I don't want my priorities or my inner circles or the things most important to me to pay such a high price. And so what do we do about that? Oftentimes it's just creating that awareness first. Right? Life is so fast that people, and I sort of use the image of driving. Life is fast paced, and so you're driving fast, and so you don't notice a lot of things. You don't have the time to notice, or maybe the awareness. You're just focused on certain what's ahead of you. When you slow down, when you're going 20 miles an hour, 25, all of a sudden you begin to notice things. And that's sort of what a coaching session, being intentional about personal growth and development, that's what it does to you. Forces you to slow down. Right before this call, I just got off a coaching call, and we use this image. It was like, because otherwise people wouldn't make time, right? These are people in leadership roles, and they're like, this forces me to stop, to create awareness, to look at, right, and to look at the bigger picture. And so probably a long-winded end, that's what I do, whether that be on the individual basis, or whether that be in group setting, whether it be teams, departments, organizations, groups of leaders, C-suite, right, or just larger groups of people where I can deliver a lot of good content on leadership and those different levels of leadership. And I do some couples work as well, because when I'm dealing with a person in a leadership role, and when I'm dealing with their inner circles and what's most important to them, sometimes their relationship, their romantic relationship, their committed relationship is also one of those elements which is important and which is paying a price. And so that's also available to them as something that could be part of that journey. So that's who I am, and that's what I do.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry to cut you off a little bit there. So the leader within yourself, is that with diving in and you're trying to figure out why you are the leader? I mean, do you see, as a person being told that they're a leader, are you seeing yourself as the leader, or is other people seeing yourself as the leader?
Yes, good question. Okay, now let's go back to what is leadership. And there's different ways that we could define that. the simplest way that someone defines as leadership is influence, right? John Maxwell uses that most simple definition of leadership as influence. A more precise definition would be leadership as a process, right, of influence of someone over others to reach a common goal. Now that's where leadership is, but then we talk about, then there's positions of authority. Now, people that are in positions of authority, positions of leadership, aren't necessarily good leaders. Okay, but they're in positions of, I like to differentiate that because people sometimes they think when they're in a position of leadership or of authority that they're necessarily good at it, and that's not always true. If leadership is influence, then we're all leaders in some way or another, because we influence, and leadership in this case, it's a neutral concept. It's neither good nor bad. Okay, so we influence some sort of environment in some way, and we influence it positively or we influence it negatively. And that first environment that we influence is ourselves. Whether it be just the voices that we have going on or just habits or whatever it is, there's things that I influence myself in a positive or negative way. And that's why I call the first inner circle is myself. And then oftentimes the other inner circles are those that are closest to me, those people that are most important to me, whether it be family, relationship, and then even my inner circle and work. And first of all, how do we want to influence them? What type of influence do we want to have over them? And most people would say, I want it to be positive. All right, let's work that out. What does positive look like? Right? If we were to ask the people that you lead, right, whether it be in your relationship, whether it be in a family, whether it be at the workplace, how would you want them to characterize your leadership? Or to be a bit more dramatic, you've passed away, and these people are going to speak at your celebration of life, at your funeral, whatever you want to call it. What would you like them to remember? Now that sounds dramatic, but again, with my background in ministry, I dealt with death all the time, and I dealt with life all the time. And so that's, for me, it's an important topic to talk about because it puts so many things in perspective. So stepping back now, back to what your question was, so leadership is influence. And I even bring that into a relationship, because a romantic couple or a committed couple, they influence each other in either positive or negative ways. So they both have leadership roles in how they're helping each other be better, how they're influencing each other, or how they're maybe dragging each other down or taking the life out of each other. Right? Most couples, they want their relationship to be life-giving, but it always isn't like that. So bringing all of this is just awareness is so important to begin to talk about it, because when people stop and then with these questions they begin to think about it, all of a sudden a lot of things come to the surface, and also then a whole path of growth is presented before them of who they want to be. Life happens to us, and we can either let just life happen to us, or we can make life happen. Does that answer some of your questions?
Yes. Yeah. Now I have a few more then. So as I see organizations having that people have that leader title, does that make that person feel better? Or, I mean, maybe they're not even supposed to have that title, and why would they even give that to a person in the first place, right? So instead of a supervisor, sometimes I'm seeing a lot now, you're seeing people have that leader title. So if you can mind sharing what your experience on people having.
Right. Well, titles, I think titles, just because who we are as human beings, we like to put words on things, concepts.
Sure.
Right. Leader has also become it's a buzzword, right? And it's so much so that, in my view, it's used so much and abused that it means everything and nothing at the same time. So that's part of why I wanted to study a master's in leadership, to be able to offer much more solid content on what leadership is and what it isn't. what dysfunctional and toxic leadership looks like, what healthy leadership looks like, what leadership in teams looks like, all that. And then what self leadership looks like, because everyone talks about it, but sometimes we can't even, well, what is leadership? Right, so that's why, thankfully, my specializing in that topic has helped me, I think, to be able to bring much greater and much solid content to it. And now, titles. A title doesn't make you a leader, right? There's a common belief that if you have the title, well, then you are. No, you're in a place of influence. So you are a leader, but are you a positive or negative leader? Now, as every position or title requires a certain type of leadership. And this is where some people aren't always aware, right? If you're at a junior leadership or junior management position, or supervisory role, and you get promoted, you're necessarily, what made you successful, if you were successful, what made you successful at that other role might not make you successful at this next role. And this is where some people don't have that awareness, right? So, all right, I need to shift because different things are expected of me. I need to use different skills and abilities. And oftentimes this isn't this awareness. Now, what else happens with people in leadership roles, especially when you get to more senior leadership roles, it's sort of this belief, if I made it to this position, right? And it was sort of, I planned on this, it was part of my goal. If I made it to this position, then I must be good at it. Mm-hmm. And if I made it to this position, then I must not have to work on myself. That's sort of I think it's an erroneous conclusion, but those are conclusions that people can draw from that. And so one of the greatest, and when any studies on leadership, they look at one of the greatest problems in leadership is lack of self-awareness. Right? Because of just what I said, people at that position, if I made it here and I've been this successful, then why do I need to work on myself? Why do I need to pay attention to all this stuff? So if one of the greatest problems in leadership is self-awareness, well, then there must be a lot of value in increasing that self-awareness so that you can lead better. We all have blind spots. Mm-hmm. Okay, and when someone in a when someone is in a position of a lot of influence, those blind spots can be very damaging. Okay? John Maxwell says everything rises and falls on leadership. And so why I get passionate about leadership, because leadership, when it's healthy, when it's functional, when it's properly exercised, it is so life-giving. It is so empowering. It does so much good for people, whether it be a country, whether it be a state, whether it be an organization, whether it be a church, whether it be a family. But when leadership is dysfunction, is unhealthy, the styles what I'm talking about, if it's toxic, right, and there's a lot of blind spots and there's just a lot of this dysfunctionality, it can be very destructive. And it can hurt a lot of people. Bring that into the family realm, it can be much more hurtful, because again, there's a lot of emotional bonds in a family dynamic and in a romantic relationship. Bring it to the faith sector, it can be very damaging, deeply damaging, because faith is a very deep human experience. And when leadership in the faith sector or the spiritual sector uses that power and authority in an improper way or an unhealthy way, oftentimes just because of lack of education, lack of awareness, whatever it is, the damage can be very deep. In the professional realm, it can still be destructive of a culture, of an organization, right? All you have to look at is numbers, or all you can look at also is turnover, right? And then, or just well-being, the well-being of the people. Right, but sometimes it won't touch the deeper fibers of the being, because in the end it's just work. But if you bring that into other realms, which touch on deeper fibers of the being, it can be even more destructive.
Do you find these leaders seeking help for themselves, or somebody else like kind of pushing them to get help?
What I see, there's different things, right? There's a huge shift and movement, kind of, you can see in society, especially in the States, sort of the Western cultures. There's a huge movement towards to developing yourself, to working on yourself. You've seen a huge rise in coaching, right? Coaching, the whole market, coaching has taken off. Therapy is a lot more, and psychology is a lot more common now, right? These are all things, if we go back 2 decades, they weren't as common, right? And they weren't maybe seen in such a positive light. So there's a huge shift in this generation to want to improve. And large corporate, now then there's the financial aspect, right? All of this costs money. The coaching market is some of it can be very pricey. It's a luxury service, really. Okay. And it's not regulated. But anyways, so large corporations usually have budgets where they can really invest in their people, and they're doing it a lot more. Right. And there's some models, if you look at Better Up, I also do some part-time work with a company called Ezra. And that is the whole concept, is that how do we make coaching more available to more people, and not just the C-suite. Okay, and so there's these models that have come about where they make coaching available to more people. And so large corporations definitely becoming part of their culture, where there's a lot of training and there's a lot of opportunities for personal development and growth, and coaching is seen in a much more positive light. That being said, there's also a lot of resistance, right? And I'm going to go maybe I'm going to start getting into gender issues as regards men. Right? Men oftentimes, because of how we are and who we are, we can be a little bit more resistant to working on ourselves. So, I don't like to generalize. I am generalizing here, but generalize is a common it's a common theme that I've seen in 30 years of working with people. Whether it be with couples or whether it be just with individuals, usually it's oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes it's the wife, the female that's more interested in that the couple do some work together and going on marriage or relationship retreats or work. Oftentimes it's women in the business world that are more interested in going to workshops and doing this and doing that and engaging in coaching. Now I'm generalizing, but there's something, men are sometimes we're just more private and we process things in a different way. But oftentimes and then there's the ego, right? When we're in leadership roles, I don't need that. Because we equalize needing coaching or needing some sort of support, we sometimes equate it to weakness. And that's an erroneous equation, right? That's not correct. I would say that not being aware, not being willing to work on it, I would call that a weakness. But there's something, as you know, I worked in the military, right? And so there's this whole thing of people in the military, there's a whole culture around, if I go talk to the chaplain, if I go to therapy, right, how will that work against me? Or is that it's equated to weakness, right? And in the military, we are not weak, therefore we don't deal with our stuff. So the military is a very easy sector to use as an example. But you bring that to the corporate world, the pattern is the same, right? Just in a different sector. In the military, and I have to say, my time with the Marines and sailors, I love the Marines and sailors, right? People that I worked with. And I loved everything that I did in the military, so I'm not trying to give them a bad rap. But there's also, everything happens in a culture, in a context, right? And culture and context definitely influence the way we behave. So I've seen, to answer your question, I've seen a huge uptake in this. There's much more interest in it, but there's also still a lot of resistance. And I think the higher you go in authority or in leadership, the more resistant you might be to working on yourself. And it's not that when you go to coaching, it's not that a coach has the answers. The art of coaching is really is very attentive listening and creative questioning, with the conviction that you have the answers inside of you. And so I facilitate a process to help you discover those answers. Now, when I coach, there's the coaching element, but then there's also sort of an advisory and educational element. Because you sometimes in some roles you work somewhat as a consultant and somewhat as an educator, at least for me. Right. And so I'd like to differentiate between those different styles when I'm talking to somebody. But coaching is very powerful. And you have the reins in the coaching relationship because it's about your agenda. It's about what do you want to get out of this. And I just facilitate a process where you come up with to help you discover your answers in your path to progress. Now, if I can add to that some education, some principles, concepts, or some, just from life experience and working with a lot of other people, what might work and what might have worked for others to help you enrich the conversation, then I might do that.
Mhm. Yeah, interesting. So I'm just curious, do you think that we need more leaders in today's age?
Well, it depends what you mean by that question.
Yeah. I meant, is there a lack of leadership out there?
Definitely. I mean, if we're going back to how we define leadership and then positive leadership,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a crisis, and there's a few things to this. There's a crisis of authority. I think since there's been an abuse of authority. Now I'm talking about the states. Okay,
Okay.
the United States has a very interesting relationship with authority because there's a huge focus on freedom and liberty, right? And individual freedom and all. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but again, freedom and liberty exists in a context. Right? Freedom and liberty, it's subject to a context, right? It's not an absolute. Right? Why do I say that? Because, well, there's rules, there's laws, right? And you have freedom. And so if my freedom was an absolute, I can walk all over your freedoms and with no consequences. And so liberty and freedom exists in the context. And also in the context of who we are as human beings. And that we want our freedom and our liberty to lead to good. Okay, so that's so in the context, it's just very interesting, the relationship of authority in the states because of the huge focus on individual freedom. All that is well and good. So what's happened is there's been a lot of problems in the use of authority and leadership in the state in a lot of countries, right? But let's use the states, whether it be in corporate, whether it be in the religious field, whether it be a nonprofit, right? The abuse or just poor leadership, right? And so what does that create in the younger generation? It creates rejection towards authority and towards leadership, which isn't healthy because then it creates the chaos. The people that are in positions of authority and leadership are meant to offer a bit of order to social context and a bit of direction. So I would say there's a crisis of leadership because if we look at some of the, whether it be the political or social layout, what's the word, layout or the landscape, there's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of confusion. So yes, I would say there's a crisis in healthy leadership. So yes, so the simple answer, I would say yes.
That's great. Yeah, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. So on your journey to get into this whole leadership, I mean, what inspired you to go down this road?
I have to say, what I am inspired, I love the human person. Passionate about the human person. And so that's going back to what I said before about leadership, is that leadership can do so much good for the human being. It can do so much damage. And so it's become a place in the way I've talked about leadership, where it's also personal leadership, self-development, and then those around us, it's important to us, and then in the larger context. I just see it's a fundamental aspect of our human experience, but oftentimes done so poorly. So that's why I'm passionate about the human person, and so therefore I would get very passionate about what leadership is and what it isn't, and how healthy leadership is so helpful and how unhealthy leadership can be so destructive. Now the backstory is I've been working in really education and development of human beings and human person for the last 30 years. Most of it was done in a religious context. I left home. I'm from small town New England. I left home at the age of 18 to go to the seminary to become a Catholic priest, right? And everything that meant. And I did so, as I look back on my story, I did so because I wanted to make a difference in the world. I wanted to do something impactful. I wanted to do something transcendental that sort of goes beyond time. also felt that maybe I was probably pressured to live by obligation and duty. I said, I want to do something heroic. This looks really hard, so that must be heroic. So that must be the path I need to take. Right? As I look back, probably not the greatest way to make a decision. But anyhow, that's what happened. And so I did that for decades. And that brought me to different countries. It brought me to, again, my global and intercultural experience is very rich. And I'm just so grateful to have had those opportunities, to live and work in a few countries in Europe and also a few countries in Central and South America. And when you work in the field of ministry, when you work with people, you become very much part of the culture, part of people's lives. So I was just so honored to have those unique and sacred windows into people's lives, and to be with them at their happiest, and to also be with people in their most difficult and tragic moments. So I think I learned a lot by being able to do that, right, in the global stage, but then also just in the personal stage with these people. And I learned that in the end, there's a lot of element that the human being ends up being the same in so many ways, right? Now, in different cultural contexts, there's a lot of different expressions, but in the end, what each human being looks for ends up a lot of time being the same. What we suffer from ends up a lot of time being the same. It's just how it's expressed. So that led me a long journey of a lot of education. I was very fortunate to do a lot of postgraduate studies in different aspects like spiritual theology, human development, family and education, and then just be able to work with so many types of people. And then I also went through, I went through a lot of difficulties at certain stages of that journey, which made me sort of have to look at, is this the right place for me? But before I made that final decision, I also worked as an active duty chaplain in the United States Navy, working with sailors and Marines. And that was also not a huge, a wonderful chapter of my life, which I loved. I got so much out of it. I think I also offered a lot to the people that I served. So meaningful to be able to serve people in that situation, that very specific context of life. Also, most of them at very young ages, right? The people in the military generally tend to be young. And I wanted to minister to people other than just Catholics. I wanted to minister to a broader audience. Going back to, because I'm really very passionate and I love the human person. And I felt that there was a limitation in the Catholic Church where, you minister mostly to Catholics, right? The people that are coming almost physically to the church. And even as a priest, I was very much about, I got to go meet people where they're at. I got to go meet them in the plazas, meet them in the streets, meet them in the stores. Because those are the people that they're not coming to church, and I got to meet them where they're at. I have to bring them the message, bring them some hope, bring them some light. And so I saw the military as a great opportunity to be able to also do that, to minister to a much broader spectrum. And in doing so, I learned so much more. Right. And I think that I was also able to make a big impact. But then that all led to, there was a lot of internal turmoil in that journey of trying to understand if that was the right place for me as regards formal religious ministry as a Catholic priest. And I slowly came to the answer that it wasn't the right place, wasn't the right fit. And so I then made the plan and decisions to start to step aside. And there's a legal process for that one. And as I did that, then I started this master's degree at Penn State, which I'm finishing now. And I've started to put together my own practice, which I'll be launching in a much more proactive way over these next few months. So that's sort of what led to where I'm at now. And the whole concept of why did I step into coaching and education? I want to continue to serve the human person, and I want to build on all of my experience and knowledge, rather than just kind of close that door and forget that chapter ever existed. I don't think that would be good for me, and I don't think that would be good for what I can bring to humanity. I want to take all of that, and maybe you repurpose it, repackage it, but to build on all of that to be able to continue to serve people.
That's great. That's great. Good. I like that. Is there one thing that you could just suggest to somebody that is a leader or wants to become a leader, like one thing that they could just kind of do besides, reaching out to you or somebody else to, just one thing on their own right now, right? Just one thing.
One thing on their own.
Yeah.
There's a few things that besides reaching out to me. There's
Well,
it sounds dramatic, but if you're listening to me, imagine you're on your deathbed and you're looking back at your life, and what do you want to see? How do you want to see the way you lived where you're at right now? What decisions do you want to see yourself make? What things do you want to see yourself give importance to? What things do you want to see you take care of? That would be one thing.
I ask that even just for myself, you know what I mean? So yeah. But
I know, I talk about death so easily, but it's if there's one common human experience we're all going to have besides being born.
exactly right.
So people go, "Whoa, you get dark," but death is not dark, right? It's an experience that we have difficulty with as human beings because it's not. We would consider it's almost not natural, right? Because we are made to live, right? But death happens to us, and so it's very much part of our life. And if we don't, like anything else in our life, if we don't pay attention to it, well, when we're missing out on a lot of valuable information, messages that are in that. And I use that death, but also I talk about, things that happen to us, things that we go through, things that we don't like about our life. If we don't pay attention to them, we're missing out on a lot of valuable information.
Yeah. So back to the funeral, the death. I guess you could look at it as what's in your obituary. What you would like to see, who you would like to see at your funeral. Is it going to be 5 people, or is it going to be 200 people, or maybe everybody can't show up, but all these people want to show up.
Right.
No, that's definitely a great example and a great way for somebody to start thinking about that. So, Matthew, I mean, how does somebody reach out and connect with you to try to be a better leader and grow?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn, also my website, bracketalliance.com. So the organization that I have is called Bracket Alliance, which is about forging an alliance with you and with your priorities, right? So you can lead better, love better, and live better. So that's where they could find me. There's different ways that I go about that. One of them is called the Results Accelerator, which is a very solid and sort of clear, not sort of, it's a very solid and clear path of coaching, which has a very specific beginning and a very specific end, which some people find very helpful. Right? And then we can have an ongoing, obviously, coaching relationship after that. But all of it brings a lot of great things to the surface around identity, around values, around beliefs, around my goals, and then we establish a very clear roadmap of what will help us get there and what will get in the way.
Awesome. I like it. So I have one question I ask everybody, and so it's what are the 3 key things that you've learned and used along your journey?
3 things. You have put me on the spot.
I know. I get everybody.
One is befriending pain. Going back to what I said about messages. Pain, whether it be physical, but also I speak more about internal, emotional, psychological, mental, any type of pain. And befriending pain, because pain has a lot of important messages for us. So that has a lot to do with my own personal story, where I didn't pay attention to it for a long time. And I won't get into that, but befriending pain, because there's very important messages there. And it's hard, that can be hard for us to do as human beings, especially internal pain, something that we want to put away, as I said before. Another thing is the beauty of the human person. And I know there's a lot of people are not nice to each other, and in the way people post on social media, and the way people treat each other in the streets. And I think it's sad, because in the end, we're all looking for the same things. Everyone has challenges and difficulties. People are carrying around a lot of pain. And we end up being very destructive as a race, as the human race. And just loving people. And I guess there's so many different ways I go with the third one, but I would say invest intentionally in leading better, loving better, and living better, because it's not something that just happens. Invest intentionally.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. Matthew, I appreciate you coming on and everything that you're doing and what you shared. I think is a great message and get out there for more leaders. So thank you for coming on.
And I thank you for the opportunity for giving me this platform.
Absolutely. No problem.
Thank you very much. I look forward to getting this message out there. So you let me know when it's ready.
You bet. You bet.